Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty. Join me this week, Jennifer Peebles. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
We'll get back to that in a minute, and the song will make much more sense here shortly. We are live. It's Sunday, May 4th, 2008. I'd like to welcome everybody who joined us this week. Today, as some of you knew, was also the elections for the ACA Board of Directors. I'll get into that in a moment. We're a live public access television program sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. The ACA has weekly meetings every Sunday at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road beginning at around 11 o'clock, except for the first Sunday of the month when we host a lecture series at the Austin History Center located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. That begins around 12:15. The June lecture will be Representative Donna Howard, who will come down and talk a little bit about what went on in the last legislative session here in Texas, what sort of legislation was introduced that may or may not have been time wasters, that may have been religiously oriented, that might have violated church-state separation, and just other things that are of interest should be hopefully of interest to everybody with regard to how the legislature works and what's going on there. We encourage people to be involved at whatever level they're comfortable with in local and national politics. We are a non-political organization. We can discuss issues. We don't discuss candidates. So we'll be keeping that in mind during the lecture, but we're looking forward to it. It should be very enjoyable. Today, we didn't have a lecture. As I mentioned before, today was the elections for the ACA Board of Directors. This is annually every May. And I have the results. The 7 directors for the 2008-2009 Board of Directors will be Don Baker, Mark Lowy, Shelley Roberts, John Iacoletti, Sandra Scythe, Mike Swift, and Lisa Mays. Don Rhodes will be the new Vice President of the ACA, and by, some miraculous bamboozlement, I will continue to serve as President of the ACA for the coming year. I'd like to thank everybody who showed up this morning, both to vote and to participate. And to volunteer to serve with the board. Next Sunday will actually be the joint meeting of the board of directors. So outgoing directors and incoming directors will meet for a regular meeting to kind of do transition and pass down stuff. I'm not expecting dramatic changes or anything else, but I appreciate the support of people who voted for me and kept me in as the president of the ACA, and I'll continue to try and do my best to represent the organization as best I can. In addition to those events in the Sunday morning time frame, the ACA also hosts a number of social events throughout the week, including Atheist Happy Hour at the Dog and Duck Pub every Thursday beginning at around 7 o'clock. And any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to attend those events. You don't have to be a member to attend. Also, after this program's over, we get together for dinner at El Arroyo on 5th Street. The address will be up on the screen. I changed the order of the announcements, and they're in there scrambling, I can tell. We're on the show. We're on the air at about 4:30. We'll be down there around 5 o'clock, and that's open to the public as well. The audio portion of this program is available for download both as a podcast and from the Atheist Experience website. You can go to atheist-experience.com for more information on that. The video portion is also there too as Google Video, and there are some individual YouTube clips up, and we're hoping to get more of those. There's also a good promo that Frank, who's one of our producers, has worked on a couple of those. One of them's right up on the ACA on the Atheist Experience webpage, so you may want to check that out because evidently I am the devil. The Atheist Community of Austin website's on your screen now, www.atheist-community.org. You can go there and find out more information about the organization, what we do, who we are, events, information about other things that we can't talk about on public access television, but there's a website forum there as well for people, and an email contact form so that you can contact the ACA along with a voicemail number that's posted as well. There's a frequently asked questions page on the website for those people who call in and ask something that we've already answered half a dozen times in the show. I may direct you to the frequently asked questions page. There's lots of stuff there about what do atheists believe, what don't atheists believe, what's the purpose of the organization, why are we here, why are we doing this show. Some of the things that we address on the show regularly, some of them that just come up in email. And speaking of email, if you'd like to contact the show, if you don't get through on the telephone today or you don't want to, you can email tv@atheist-community.org. Please provide any feedback, criticism, questions, concerns. That goes to myself, most of the co-hosts, some of the people behind the scenes as well. please in the subject line put AETV or NPR for Nonprofits Radio. That'll make sure that you, hopefully it'll make sure that you get through the spam filter. We can't promise to answer every email, but I do read all of them and I do respond to a great many of them. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio podcast called The Nonprofits. That's PROPHETS. And you can go, for more information, you can go to nonprofitsradio.com. We are live every other Saturday from 2 to 3:30 with room for about 30 people to connect. But the podcast is uploaded within an hour or so afterwards, and you can download it, add it to your iPod or whatever device you're using to listen to podcasts. It's hosted by Dennis LeBay, features myself, Russell Glasser, Schilling Scythe now, sorry. And this coming Saturday should be a good show, but I'm not going to give out too many details because we don't want to crash my server. But we'll be looking forward to that. In addition to all of those other events, and I've already covered, I guess, all of the regular announcements, but we did this past Thursday was the National Day of Reason and also the National Day of Prayer, which is what kind of prompted the National Day of Reason. As I mentioned on previous programs, we have absolutely no objection to people exercising their rights to pray publicly, to go down to the Capitol and pray, to organize as private citizens and pray collectively. Our only objection was government involvement and endorsement of this because we feel it violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. I'm not aware if any of that took place. I don't know if our governor made any kind of proclamation in support of it. But I can say that we went down there, and the first thing that we noticed was that there wasn't any evangelical church service on the steps of the Capitol as there have been in years past. Around 11 o'clock, Special Olympics folks met down there for their running of the torch down Congress. There was quite a good turnout for that. And Governor Perry was there. I tried to talk to Governor Perry after that was over as he was walking back up to the Capitol. But of course, he just kept walking and wasn't taking questions. And I'm not going to fault him for that. I don't think he had any idea who I was or who anybody else who was chasing him down asking questions were. But I'm going to offer a standing invitation for Governor Perry to call into the program whenever he'd like to explain his comments that he made recently on the 700 Club, where he said that basically secularism is a virus that's destroying America, and other comments after the release of his book where he essentially, and we've talked about this before, equated atheists with common street thugs and other criminals, as if we don't have rights. My curiosity isn't about why he holds those opinions. I have no doubt at all that he holds them. They're part of his sincere religious beliefs. And he's, as a private citizen, is entitled to express those opinions, even on the 700 Club. My curiosity is how one can pretend to be a fair representative for every citizen of the state of Texas when you're also comfortable going on national television to denigrate decent, honest citizens simply because they don't agree with your religious ideology. I realize, we're in Texas. Atheists are a minority everywhere, and you're probably not concerned with us at all. We don't really matter. We're not a significant portion of your constituency to even bother with. But the fact of the matter is that you publicly insulted people whose only crime is that they disagree with you on matters of religion. As an atheist, you're not obligated to any particular ideology. It's simply a response position to theism. So there are Republican atheists. Some of them may have actually voted for Governor Perry. Democrat atheists, liberal, conservative, you can hold any position on any given issue. And I'm really curious as to why he's so comfortable openly insulting decent people who there's no indication that they've done anything wrong. So, Governor, you have an open invitation to call in whenever you'd like. That out of the way, there was a handful of people that in the Shark Tank at the Capitol, a few people playing songs, maybe 20, 25 at any one time down there to pray. The ACA had half a dozen or so folks down front at 11th and Congress with signs that supported reason, church-state separation. Joe Zemecki, I believe, filmed some of that and posted it on YouTube, and also went to donate blood afterwards, which is something that a lot of atheist organizations have done on the National Day of Prayer as a way of showing that there are productive things that you can do. the hands that help are infinitely more useful than hands that pray. And it's much more beneficial to give blood, do anything that's productive and beneficial to humanity, other than talking to yourself or your invisible friend. So that's what went on with the National Day of Prayer, the National Day of Reason. Stay tuned if you're in the Austin area for more information possibly about a solstice party and a number of other things coming up over the coming months. Don't forget about the lecture June 1st. And on that note, I think we'll move on. For those of you who don't know, Jennifer Peeples has been with us for a few months now, participating in different events. And the subject that you're going to talk about today, I kind of want to be up front. It's a contentious issue. It covers religious issues. It covers social issues. It covers medical issues. Penn and Teller covered it on their Showtime special Bullshit. And, I'll let you go ahead and let everybody know who you are by way of introduction, and we'll just jump right into cut straight to the chase.
Okay, well put. Okay, my name is Jennifer Peebles, and as Matt said, I've been participating with ACA for a few months now. I've actually been an atheist for a long time. I don't even remember how long ago it was that I lost my belief, but I think it was probably sometime in my college years. And I did come from a religious family. In fact, my father, prior to his death, was studying to become a Methodist minister. So, and then I've got my fair share of fundy nut jobs in the family. So,
join the club.
Yeah, I know I'm in good company here. So, anyway, that's my background as far as how I came to atheism. The topic I wanted to discuss today was male circumcision. Which
actually, one of the reasons that we were prompted to do this was listener mail. There were some people who emailed into the TV show, said, hey, have you ever covered this topic? And I said, we have, but not really in depth and not as part of the show. So your mail matters. So we're covering a subject that somebody wanted to talk about. And it's something that we think is important to discuss, at least to get information out to people as well. So.
Absolutely. Because as you said, there is a religious aspect of this that can't be overlooked. In fact, it's the religious aspect, I think, that I find most disturbing, because we have a very small religious minority in this country that's actually foisted this practice upon the majority of American males. One of the things that prompted me to investigate circumcision is that I found that my partner and I were expecting a son. And in order to make an informed decision about what's best for him, we felt we had to do our due diligence and investigate this further. And just as a way of informing everyone where I come from on this, I come from a family where there is no tradition of male circumcision. Most of the males in my family are intact. And my partner comes from a family where most of the males are circumcised. And so we had a very different perspective on this. Her view was that this is normal, this is how it's done. Mine was, well, no, this is not normal, because the only male that I knew of in my family who was circumcised was my brother. And he was circumcised entirely without parental consent. The doctor did it, never asked or anything. And that was the way it was done prior to about the 1970s. So we felt that we owed it to our son to make an informed choice here.
Right.
And so in researching this a little more, sort of stepping out of my family background, what I found was that this is really an ancient blood ritual that got medicalized. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that it was a familiar practice for a lot of Jewish physicians. And so they brought this notion into the medical mainstream. And of course, a lot of it came to be during the Victorian era. And in fact, prior to about 1870, there were very few men in the U.S. who were circumcised. After about 1870, it started to increase. And then post-World War II is when it really started to become very common. And there are lots of reasons for that, but a lot of it had to do with Victorian notions around purity and preventing masturbation.
Yes.
But there were lots of other reasons that were invented. There are some historical claims about circumcision that are just, we look at them now and they're pretty fantastic. The main one was that it prevented masturbation. Okay. So anyone who's ever either been a teenage male or been around a teenage male, you know that kryptonite couldn't prevent that. So, so that was a bogus reason up front. It also reduces sexual sensation, and this is something that Jewish medical philosophers dating back to the first century, they put forward this idea that it did reduce sexual sensation, and they thought this was a good thing because it kept the man's mind off of sex and on to prayer. So it was promoted specifically because it reduced their sexual sensation. The other thing that was promoted is that it promotes hygiene, basically that it's easier to keep clean. And there's some interesting background on that I'm going to get to in a minute. But the other thing that came into vogue after sometime in the early 20th century was that it could prevent all kinds of diseases. And some of the diseases that it was supposed to prevent included tuberculosis, insanity, plus a whole lot of other vaguely defined mental illnesses, epilepsy, sexually transmitted diseases, the latest of which is HIV, but it included things like syphilis, and also penile cancer. And the penile cancer thing is very interesting because we now know that that's closely linked to exposure to human papillomavirus, right, and also smoking. And
you had to include that.
Yeah.
Honestly, though, when you mention insanity, it reminds me of like the wellness center phases and these quack doctors who would, they'd prescribe. Essentially, they were vibrators to cure female insanity.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm with you there, buddy. But I mean, it's like we've come so far. We've gained a good understanding, not a perfect understanding, of the universe we live in, the human body, how things work. But we don't have to go back very far at all to find just medical nonsense that seems so obvious now. There's plenty of medical nonsense now. I mean, you get your homeopathy and acupuncture, sure, and chiropractic and whatever else. But I mean, we're talking about things like phrenology, where you're reading the bumps on somebody's head to determine whether or not they're likely to become a mass murderer. So this whole insanity thing is, it was sexual tension, and we're just saying that these women are going nuts. We better give them something to do. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I guess you can cure anything as long as you're looking at it through this lens of equal insanity. But.
Yes, and getting back to the STD and the penile cancer thing, the whole thing with the penile cancer thing is that circumcised men can and do get cancer of the penis. However, it's such a low incidence, especially in the U.S., that if you were going to do a prophylactic surgery to protect a male from some form of cancer, then you'd probably want to do a double mastectomy on him at birth, because male breast cancer is more prevalent than penile cancer. So clearly there was no science behind that. And in fact, the American Cancer Society does not recommend circumcision as a preventive measure for preventing penile cancer. And in fact, in terms of the medical claims, there's no major medical organization anywhere in the world that recommends routine neonatal circumcision.
And this discussion's come up quite a bit. One of the reasons why we were happy to talk about this is because we've talked about it amongst ourselves at the various ACA outings. But in doing the research, not only do you have these kind of silly, I love to call them the wellness center things, because to me that word is just funny. Those kinds of ideas. But you also have, like in the 70s, the American Association of Pediatrics came out and basically said there is no medical justification at all for doing routine neonatal circumcisions. And then they reaffirmed this in 83, and then other groups jump on board. And so for the past 20, 25 years or so, we've had pretty much a general medical consensus that regardless of whatever benefits do or don't exist with regard to circumcision, there's no medical justification for circumcising infants.
Right. And that really is what this came down to as far as making our decision for our son, was that, do we as parents have a right to choose something for him that he may not choose for himself when he's an adult? And even if there are medical benefits, such as the claimed protection against HIV, that's a decision that he can make when he's an adult and he can examine his own sexual practices and decide for himself what's the best choice for him. And so our view on this is that we've simply preserved his choice for when he's older. I guess I wanted to go ahead and talk about history of circumcision.
Sure.
How we got from where we are today, or how we got to this point in time where it's kind of a ubiquitous thing in American culture. First of all, circumcision actually predates recorded history. It's been around probably since the Stone Age, and in fact, there are some references in the Bible where it talks about Moses' wife cutting her son's foreskin with a sharpened piece of stone.
Yeah, Exodus 4.
And there's lots of references to stone knives. This suggests that the tradition actually originated in the Stone Age, when they would actually use sharpened flint knives to do this. So it's a very ancient tradition. It's really tied to notions of ritual purity, and it was seen primarily in religions and cultures that had a strong emphasis on cleanliness. And specifically in Egypt, it was always associated with sun god worship. So whenever it was practiced, it was associated with the sun god worship. And I guess there is one historical account or probably a lot, that talked about the sun god Ra, who circumcised himself, and from the blood of his circumcision created 2 other minor deities from that. So,
wow, that's a brave guy. Ra.
Indeed. Self-circumcision actually is practiced among some fetishists. You can even buy the implements of such things from these fetish sites. So if anyone is so inclined, there they go. So I will not provide access to that information. Right? You can Google it. So then when we talk about circumcision in this country, where we're really getting this tradition, it's really derived from the Jewish tradition. So I want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Jewish law talks about circumcising males on the 8th day. That's in Genesis chapter 17. And they probably got this custom from the Egyptians, just because of the close association there. And the fact that you're talking about cutting part of the male member, not surprising, given that we're basically talking about a Canaanite fertility cult here. So the fact that they would do something to sacrifice a part of the male member, in many cases this was seen as the same thing as pruning a bush to increase its production. So it was tied to notions of fertility and suitability for marriage, as well as ritual cleanliness and purity. So
that's the the passage you were talking about earlier, Exodus 4. I think it's verses 24 through 26 or whatever. Basically, Moses and his wife Zipporah are traveling, and they're in their tent, and God decides that He's going to come and kill Moses. And they don't really say why, but the presumption, based on the moral of the story, is that they hadn't actually circumcised their young child yet. So God comes down to the tent to kill Moses, but his wife wakes up, realizes what's going on, grabs a sharp stone, does the circumcision on their little kid, and then throws the bloody remnant at the feet of Moses, and this scares God off. Well, in fairness, if you read the Bible, God then decides that He's not going to kill Moses after all. I wouldn't want to say that you could scare God off, but sure seemed that way.
Yes. And according to Jewish law, it's the father's responsibility to ensure that his son is circumcised. And he has the right to perform the circumcision himself. Now, most fathers choose to appoint a surrogate to do this, and they can appoint a specially trained rabbi called a moil who will do the circumcision. Now, a ritual Jewish circumcision consists of 3 parts. There's the actual cutting part. Then there's the part where the moil will tear the glands, or the foreskin from the glands, usually with a sharpened fingernail.
And it's important to, we didn't bring in a whole bunch of pictures.
Yeah.
And we don't want to do a whole anatomy course. But the reason for that is that the foreskin in newborns isn't retractable.
Yes.
And it's still attached to the glands, and this doesn't actually become retractable necessarily until about age 5 or around then, and perhaps even later.
Yes.
So what he's got to do is actually a tearing procedure. I apologize for grimacing all through this show, but it's, as somebody who possesses a penis, this is a little uncomfortable. But there's a tearing of the glands in order to get them back to where they can put the implement on to start the cutting or continue the cutting.
And then after the foreskin is torn from the glands, then there's a final part of it which requires that the mohel take some wine in his mouth and then put his mouth on the infant's penis and suck the blood from that and then spit the wine and the blood in a receptacle.
Yes, you actually heard that right.
Yes.
This is Orthodox Judaism. This is the procedure.
Yes.
Now, to be fair, I have no reason to think that all Orthodox Jews are actually following this procedure. It kind of fell out of fashion, and then they were like, "Oh no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that." And you heard fewer and fewer horror stories about it.
Yes.
But as recently as 2003, there was a rabbi/doctor who the concern, and I think he got this backwards. There's a concern because of, and I don't know if you were going to get to this, where there were reports that some children have been infected.
Yes.
With syphilis and other things that they've got from the rabbi through this procedure. As concerns for HIV mounted, this particular rabbi, and I apologize, for some reason I thought I had his name on here and I don't. He wrote, a final concern involves circumcision. In the Orthodox rite, after making the incision, the mole actually sucks the wound to draw out the blood and promote clotting. Okay. Maybe you should talk to a doctor about, sucking blood out of a wound to promote clotting. I'm pretty sure that pressure is one of the preferred methods. But since babies can acquire the virus through their mothers, this creates risks for moles.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, you got it all backwards. I mean, your primary concern is that some AIDS baby is going to infect the rabbi who's trying to suck the blood off of the circumcision. What? I mean, that's nuts. Let's talk about the okay, maybe there is a medical concern there, but there's also a concern of the rabbi infecting the kid. How about we just look at both of them and say, this is insane. Let's try not to infect anybody. But this guy says that the problem is really pretty easy to resolve because the AIDS virus cannot survive in a solution of 75% alcohol. So just swish some 150 proof rum around in your mouth and you won't get infected. That's the solution they come up with.
Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, mohels actually have infected 8-day-old infants with not only syphilis, but tuberculosis, human papillomavirus, and a whole host of other
So basically, almost
diseases.
any disease that they said circumcision would cure 100 years ago has been transmitted to a child because of this particular procedure.
Yes.
Woo.
And even, not even in just ritual Jewish circumcisions, but in other types of circumcisions, mass circumcisions of boys in, for example, Turkey, where it's very common to circumcise a boy between the age of 6 and 10. Tribal circumcisions in Africa. These
and
types.
Actually, there's a news story this week on that. A guy by the name of Buntu Mahalasa, who had a degree in organizational psychology from the University of Cape Town. To his friends, he was an inspiring Christian youth leader, and he's dead. He went out into the bush to be indoctrinated into adulthood at the age of 25. He was tied up for days and severely beaten, but that's not what killed him. He died of septicemia that set in after a botched circumcision.
Right.
Now, I realize that this is not, I don't want to equate this to the medical procedure. The instance, I don't want to be unfair in the treatment of the subject. The instance of complications, even in hospitals, is still around 2%. And while this is an extreme case, okay, we're out in the woods and we probably didn't follow a good medical procedure. The fact of the matter is that even following the best medical procedures, there is a risk. And you don't want to just dismiss that as, oh, this is an average everyday surgery, even though it is every day.
Yeah.
There's still a risk.
Yes. And one thing I wanted to get back to on this Jewish tradition was this ritual about tearing the foreskin from the glands. That wasn't a part of the original requirement under ritual Jewish circumcision. That originated in, I think, around 200 BCE, and it was because a bunch of Jewish males decided to go they wanted to participate in Greek games. And in Greece, it was considered very discourteous to expose your glands. In fact, it was prohibited during the games. So what most Greek men would do is they would take a short piece of string and tie it around the end of their foreskin to make sure that there were no inadvertent exposures. And so the Jewish males who wanted to participate in these games were obliged to do the same. What happened over time is that it actually stretched their foreskins out, and so when they returned home, the rabbis saw their Hellenized foreskins and were outraged and said...
And I'm curious as to how that actually happened.
Yeah. So they instituted this requirement that you had to rip the glands, the foreskin and the glands apart, and basically make it a much more severe procedure than it was originally. Yeah.
So I'm imagining they'd get a T-shirt. I went to Greece and all I got was an elongated foreskin.
Yeah, there you go.
And this T-shirt. But, actually, we've got one caller on who I think has something quick, and I don't want to have him hold forever. So if we can, you there, Alan?
Yes, I'm here.
You had something for us?
Yeah, I have proof that only atheists get to go to heaven.
Really? What is it?
Yeah. Well, you know the old past gods before Jesus, they have like similar stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, the birth and all that, virgin birth and all that good stuff. Well, Christians will say that the devil went back in time and actually created these old gods to test the faith, to test our faith.
If you're listening to your TV, turn it down. There's a delay, so just use the phone.
No, it might just be an echo. But I believe that he didn't stop there. He also created the Holy Bible itself.
Ah.
See, but now he's able to take a vacation from it because he gets most everybody to believe in it. He makes it pretty obvious too. You know, the stoning your rebellious children.
Yeah, you'd think anybody could figure it out.
Yeah, kill people just because of their sex life. Cutting off women's hands for breaking up a fight. You know, it's like in the story of Adam and Eve. The apple is actually the Bible, and if you eat the fruit, you go to hell.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a test in the life.
Well, that's an interesting theory. I think we'll have to toss that around and see if maybe we can get some theologians to call in and comment on it.
Right.
Thanks a lot, Alan. I want to get back to this so we can get this knocked out. I just didn't want you to have to wait on hold forever. So.
Okay, that's fine.
Appreciate the call.
All right, thank you.
So, yeah, the number's up on your screen. Feel free to call in to talk about this topic or anything else you might want to talk about. We've got quite a bit more to cover, and we'll try and get some calls in between, but I want to make sure we get this topic covered well and give Jen the time since she was nice enough to come on today. So please continue.
Okay. Well, next I want to talk a little bit about Muslim traditions, because Muslims actually, when we think about circumcision, we typically think about Jewish males being circumcised, but in fact, Muslims make up the largest number of circumcised males in the world. And there's actually nothing in the Quran that requires circumcision. So this is not one of the 5 pillars of faith or anything. There was just a reference in one passage in the Quran that talked about Abraham being a worthy man, and that Muhammad was supposed to be like Abraham. And Abraham, of course, was circumcised as a very old man, so they took that, I think, to the extreme. But there are, among the Muslim customs, there's the fitrah, which has to do with standards of personal hygiene. And so there are 5 parts of that. It includes shaving pubic hair, circumcision, mustache trimming, plucking armpit hair, and let's see, nail trimming. So it's just basic personal hygiene. Somehow circumcision got wrapped into that. As far as what it says about female circumcision, and I use that term to mean any kind of female genital cutting. So for those people who are saying, "Oh, you're trivializing, what's done to women," I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying that I'm using that term to refer to any kind of genital cutting. What it says about female circumcision is that it's an honorable thing to do, but not a requirement. So there is no religious requirement in Islam for a woman to be circumcised, but it's considered honorable to do.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. I mean, a couple of years ago, and I still have the notes from the show that I did back then, I talked about this kind of in passing, about how the Bible, it seems to be completely obsessed with circumcision and foreskin, especially in the Old Testament. And I've literally got everything that's on this page is just shorthand for verses, maybe 15 or 20 in Genesis, a handful in Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, James. I mean, it's New Testament and Old, with all this obsession about circumcision and foreskins. And you have the same thing. Here you have Muslim culture with their pillars of faith, where their God, for all practical purposes, is concerned with trimming your fingernails. And there may be good advice in there, but is this really the sort of thing that we need divine revelation on?
Yeah.
and yet they're also promoting things like female genital mutilation, which is, I'm fine with addressing a circumcision as cutting in those circumstances as well, but I mean, we might as well call it what it is.
Yes.
I mean, if there is any medical data that shows that there's some positive benefit to male circumcision, and there may well be, that still isn't a justification for routine infant circumcision, there is zip on this issue of female genital mutilation, female circumcision, whatever you want to call it. And oddly enough, we live in a time where, I mean, just this past week, I think, the parliament in Yemen voted against a bill that would have outlawed female genital mutilation. And this is believed to affect nearly 25% of Yemeni women. And the reason that was the issue's too sensitive. We can't get a religious consensus, so we're not going to make a law.
Yeah.
I'm a huge supporter of religious freedom, the right of every individual to follow the dictates of their conscience until that right affects others. That's the limit. My rights end where your rights begin. You're free to believe whatever you want, practice whatever you want. If you, as an individual, want to mutilate your own genitals, feel free. I'd rather you seek counseling because I think you're probably doing harm to yourself for really bad reasons. But I'll give you that right. I'll support your right to be as foolish as you want about anything like this. But in this modern era, and I realize we're talking about Yemen and not necessarily one of the pinnacles of human rights, it's insane to me to think that we're not going to provide a law that protects the rights of human beings because we can't get religious folks on board with it. That's the world we live in. Yes. And while we as Americans might look at that and say, oh, that's some, little third world pissant country that they're so backwards and they've got these silly religions. No, it's the same here. It may not have the same impact. It may not be as impactful at kind of a visceral level as something like female genital mutilation. But religion steps in the way of protecting people's rights in America as well. And when we're talking about this issue of male circumcision, and I know you're going to get to this, it's really, even I wasn't opposed to it. I grew up, I was a Christian, it was normal. I didn't think about it. I don't look at myself as, I don't consider myself to be a victim. I don't look at myself as mutilated. But the fact of the matter is, if somebody were to come up today and say, and we'd never had circumcision of any kind before, and say, hey, look, I've done a bunch of research here, and I'm pretty sure that if we just trim off the foreskin on men's penises, might see a whole bunch of positive health benefits. What would happen? Well, we'd do some research. We'd investigate it like we would with any other scientific idea. I mean, after all, we remove people's tonsils and appendixes, but not until they're causing a problem.
Yeah.
But we'd take a look at it. And then what would happen? People would be provided with medical information and be able to make an informed decision. Nobody, if this hadn't already happened, if this hadn't been a tradition throughout the centuries, nobody would suggest, in any rational sense, that we begin routinely circumcising every male that's born.
Yes, and in fact, that was one of the justifications that early Jewish philosophers used for doing it to an 8-day-old infant, aside from the fact that God told Abraham to do it, was that if you waited until later, as most of the desert tribes around there did, it was a puberty rite or a coming of age rite. If you wait until later, the man might refuse it. And so you could do this for the boy and basically initiate him into the covenant before he had a chance to refuse, before his fear would overcome him and he would have an opportunity to refuse.
Right.
And this was important because it was the father's responsibility to make sure this was done. And so if the boy later refused, the father was on the hook for not having his son circumcised.
What happened to free will? I thought free will was this important thing that their God wanted.
Well, and what happened to the Jewish prohibition about mutilating your body or marking your flesh or something?
Well, this one's different.
No, I know, yeah.
God went and made a deception.
I know.
I want to go ahead and take this. Mason, you there?
Yeah. Hey, how are y'all doing?
Good.
Good.
I'm watching the show and enjoying what y'all have to say. But I'm kind of wondering, first of all, what are y'all's qualifications? Y'all talk a lot about a lot of things, and you don't seem to have an expert from the other side there, sort of, to give their case and make their case. And what are y'all's backgrounds to sort of? Are y'all just personally interested? Did y'all?
Well, I'm personally interested because I have a son, and I had to make a decision. I don't know why that's even a decision that anyone gets to make for a helpless infant, but legally I had to make a decision for him, and so I educated myself about it.
And that kind of gets me to my second point. First of all, you mentioned that a Moyle was a special rabbi. A Moyle was not a rabbi. A Moyle was someone.
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, he can be a rabbi, but he could be a doctor as well.
I mean, it can be. I mean, for hundreds and thousands of years, it was actually a specific job. And all these things that y'all are talking about and have researched and have looked into, I think it's worth noting that most Jewish people are aware of everything that you're saying.
Right.
And every male has gone through the circumcision.
There's something wrong with your sound. Can you turn your TV down or move back or whatever?
Yeah, hold on. Anyway, that better?
Not particularly, but go ahead.
Well, anyway, the TV's off. But I'm just trying to get the point across to you. First of all, you mentioned the Orthodox Jews and the sucking of the blood from the penis. But you don't mention the fact that that is done in an incredibly minuscule amount of Jewish circumcisions at this point.
Actually, what I said was that I don't think most Orthodox Jews do it. For years, they said it wasn't being done at all, but we know that it is being done. I'm not claiming that this is an epidemic. I'm saying that this is the tradition. I never gave any numbers.
The practice, I would say that the tradition is what you're currently doing, and I would tell you that 99.99% of the people out there.
Okay, where did you get that number?
Where did I get that number? I know I'm Jewish, and let me tell you, I worked on me with a complete artist.
Okay, but I mean, here's my point. You call in to ask what our qualifications are. We're giving information from medical organizations. We're talking about history. We're giving our stuff on it, but I'm not quoting numbers unless I have facts from an organization. And yet you're comfortable with exaggerating to say 99.9%. Let's be honest. You just pull that number out of your ass.
I am pulling the number out. I'm The average Jewish person, it's such a small minority of people that still do that.
I understand.
Okay.
I understand. I had to put you on hold. There's something really, really wrong with your phone connection. I had to put you on hold. We understand that this is an extreme minority. It may have even been, let's say it was a practice that completely stopped, just like cutting with flint. That's not what our objection is at all. And we haven't actually we're just giving background information. We haven't, I don't think, really got to the point of stating what our position is and why actually yet.
No.
But I'll let you get one last word in if the connection holds, but then we're going to move on. You there?
Yeah, the way you're presenting it really makes it look as if it's something barbaric, something that is harming the child.
It is barbaric.
It is barbaric.
Consideration whatsoever, and that's just not the truth.
Okay.
That is the truth.
It is the truth.
It does harm the child.
It is barbaric. It is medically unnecessary to do this on newborns. It is barbaric. It is tradition, and it does do harm.
I've not heard one published report, and tell me where I can look online for some medical organization who says that it is barbaric and that it harms the child.
There's no medical organization in the world that recommends neonatal circumcision.
No. I don't know that there are medical organizations.
Yeah, actually, the
that would forbid it.
Canadian Pediatric Organization absolutely doesn't recommend it, and the Canadian Health, the National Health Service in Canada and in England do not pay for it. It's actually. And.
All right.
And in Scandinavia, they've actually passed laws that banned it, and they will put you in jail if you circumcise a child.
I got to drop you because of this weird feedbacky noise that we're getting on the phone. We'll continue to address what you're talking about, both in the comments. If you can get a better phone and call back, I'd recommend doing that. Whoops. There we go. The thing is, you're not going to get a medical organization to come out and say, this is barbaric. This is a contentious issue that is related to Lot's choice. My question is, it's my opinion that this is barbaric. That's it. In my view, this is barbaric. In Jen's view, it's barbaric. The fact that it does harm, I think, is something that is absolutely beyond question. We are removing a part of a human being without their consent. There's pain involved. That alone is harm. There is risk involved. That alone is harm. When we're talking about, we mentioned earlier, and I have information here, pro and con, with regard to circumcision and possible medical benefits of circumcision. What we're objecting to is routine infant circumcision. There is no medical justification for this. If you had a grown man, do you think it would be fair? Do you think it would be right to circumcise a grown man without their consent? Would that not be a violation of their rights as a human being? I think almost everybody would agree that it is. You don't have that right. Why then is it okay to do this to an infant who cannot give consent? Is it simply because parents own their children and get to do whatever the hell they want? If that's the case, why not let the parents perform an appendectomy? An appy is relatively normal surgery. It's not, I mean, yes, it's more invasive than a circumcision. I'm not equating the two. But I tell you what, we remove that kid's appendix, I can provide a 100% guarantee that he will never suffer appendicitis or ruptured appendix because it's gone. Hey, you know what? We could cut the whole penis off and guarantee that he would never get an STD from sexual activity because he can't. The question at this point becomes one of rights of an individual, including an infant, and a cost-benefit analysis, for lack of a better phrasing, of what are the potential risks. All I'm saying, and I think all Jen's saying, although I'll let her get back to more what she wants to talk about in a second, is give everyone their rights. Let them make an informed decision on their own. There's absolutely no reason to perform a circumcision on an infant. They're not going to be having sex at 1 or 2 years old. They are at no risk from sexually transmitted diseases, even if that's a benefit. Get them up 12 as a coming of age, like when it used to be done. Provide them all the medical information you can. Let them make an informed decision. If they choose on their own, based on good medical evidence, after consulting with experts to do this, congratulations. If they don't, Congratulations. They've exercised a choice. That's the important thing. I'm not saying that circumcision in and of itself is bad in every situation for everybody. Do whatever you want, as long as you're making an informed decision as an adult.
And in fact, just to clarify my position on this, I think that an adult male should be able to choose to cut any part of himself off, including his foreskin, for any reason or no reason at all. As long as he's an adult, he's made an informed decision, I think that's his right. And in fact, I think that it should be treated as any other cosmetic procedure, unless, of course, there's a medical indication. And even then, he has a right to consult with a physician who will give him the best cosmetic result possible. And I'll even go on record here in saying that there's a guy in Atlanta who, I have no objective way of verifying this, but I'm told he does excellent work. He actually uses a microsurgical technique so that the suture line is very small. If you're a guy and you're thinking about getting cut, I recommend you look up the Circumcision Center in Atlanta and see if that's something you're interested in, because I think you want to go for somebody that's going to give you a good result. So, I have no problem with an adult male making that decision for himself. I just don't believe that anyone has a right to take that away from an infant.
Yeah, and on a personal note, not to let everybody on the planet know too much about my genitalia, I was circumcised, as were the majority of kids in the United States. By the way, it's not the majority worldwide.
No.
It is in our society in the United States. Worldwide, it's about 60% worldwide or less.
No, 60% currently being circumcised in this country.
Right, worldwide is 60% uncircumcised.
No, 85% worldwide.
Woo.
85% of the men in the
Here's
world
the
are
thing.
intact.
I'm not mad. I'm not mad at my parents for making that decision. Maybe they made the best decision. Maybe they didn't even think about it. Maybe this was just tradition. Maybe it was something they did.
They may not have been asked.
They may not have been asked. I don't look. As I mentioned before, I don't look at myself as a victim. I don't necessarily see myself as mutilated. But given the choice, I would prefer that the procedure had not been done on me. And it's not just about the fact that they removed the most sensitive part of the penis. It's not about any of those factors. Those are important things that I think are worth talking about. My objection is one of rights. I don't see how you can justify altering the body of any human without their consent, without a good medical justification. And the fact of the matter is, there is no good justification for this. The foreskin isn't even retractable, as we talked about earlier, in kids until 5 or 6 years of age. And they've got to do this tearing procedure, and there's another grimace, in order to separate from the glands. This is, okay, they're an infant. They're not going to remember it. Nonsense. There are studies being, we don't have a good understanding of how really early experiences affect the rest of our lives. There are some studies now that are investigating this about children's pain responses.
Yes.
And how early trauma, including circumcision, which is, by the way, trauma. I mean, it's not like there's almost never anesthesia, because that's too dangerous for one thing.
Yeah.
There's definitely pain involved. It's only the most sensitive part of your body. So there's pain, and that creates trauma in an infant. Now, it's possible that this is something they forget. It may be that newborns just can't possibly remember that. But there is evidence that this does affect people's response and reaction to pain.
Yes.
It's not solid. It's not confirmed. I don't want to go out on a limb here and say, oh my gosh, they're traumatizing kids. Maybe we're traumatizing kids, maybe we're not. We're doing harm. Is it lasting harm? I'm not sure. What I do know is that there's no medical justification to remove the foreskin of a 1 week or less infant. It's just silly. We need to stop pretending, because of traditions, oh, it's just the best way. They're better off being circumcised, so we're going to go ahead and do it for them now. Well, they're better off without an appendix. Let's do that for them too. Maybe we could cut off the ends of the fingers so they could never get a hangnail. if you sew that stub up right, they still have really good dexterity. I mean, you can play the piano. You wouldn't quite have the reach. But, maybe we could do that for them, too.
Or we could pull all their teeth because, root canals hurt.
Well, of course, they're not going to have teeth at birth, but when those first ones come in, we know they're going to fall out anyway.
Yeah, just
and it's going to hurt. You got to tie a string to it and slam the door. So let's just anesthetize them and yank all their teeth out. I don't want to make an argument from absurdity. The point here is that when you're making decisions about what medical procedures to do on somebody, there are a lot of factors to consider. And what I said at the outset is that this is a contentious issue. It's up to the individual. I have here a list of both pros and cons. Yes, we're focusing more on the history and more on the cons. That's, I don't claim to be unbiased in this, but I challenge anybody to say that we're presenting evidence that isn't actually factual. This is stuff we researched, and I'll go with the motto of "Leave the hoodie on his woody." But anyway, there's 3 callers. I don't want to. Have you got what have you got left that you want to definitely get to? And then
let's talk a little bit about current practices here. As we mentioned, there's no medical association anywhere in the world that recommends routine neonatal circumcision. And approximately 85% of the world's men are intact, which means they've not been cut. Okay, and in fact, in Scandinavian countries, fewer than 1 man in 17,000 will die without his foreskin. So these claims that you have all these kind of penis problems and stuff, and that he's eventually going to need to be circumcised is just nonsense. Because in Scandinavia, they have a very low incidence of any kind of problems, and they just don't do it much there. The worldwide incidence, about 13 million men and boys are circumcised each year. And compare that to about 2 million women and girls who are subjected to female genital mutilation. So clearly there's a lot more societal acceptance of cutting up men's genitals versus women's genitals, which is not to minimize either of them. One thing I would point out, though, that everywhere that female genital mutilation is practiced, in every case, they also circumcise males. There's no society that cuts women that does not also cut men. So in this country, about 1 million boys are circumcised in the U.S. each year. Whether or not they get any pain relief during the procedure largely depends on what kind of physician does the procedure. Pediatricians are the most likely to use pain relief, followed by family practice physicians, followed by obstetricians. Less than half of obstetricians use any kind of pain relief. And guess who does the most of the circumcisions? Right. So odds are that if your son is circumcised by an OBGYN, they won't get pain relief. And I will say that all of the OBs in the practice that delivered my son, they would use pain relief.
And I think it's also fair to interject here that may be for very good reason. If we were discovered tomorrow that there is a positive medical benefit that is sufficient to justify routine neonatal circumcision, it may be the case that it's also best performed without anesthesia, because anesthesia can be, giving drugs at all to any newborn is an extremely tricky process. So the point here isn't that we're doing it without anesthesia when we could be. It's the point that we're doing it at all.
Right.
And the anesthesia question is separate. It may be necessary, it may be too hazardous, but why are we doing it at all?
Which brings me to this whole position by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and this is their statement on informed consent. Okay, and it says that providers have legal and ethical duties to their child patients to render competent medical care based on what the patient needs, not what someone else expresses. The pediatrician's responsibility to his or her patient exists independently of parental desires or proxy consent. So to me, that suggests that ethically, pediatricians have to refuse non-therapeutic circumcisions.
Yeah.
Because this is just an expression of parental consent, and absent any medical condition, there's no benefit to subject the child to this kind of trauma.
Yeah, it ends up at that. I mean, there may be a medical benefit later, as we mentioned before. At that point, it is essentially cosmetic, because at that point, there is no medical justification
Right.
for it.
And so why it persists? Well, it's a departure from the normal surgical protocol, which includes informed consent, medical necessity, and proof of benefit, which none of which are established in the case of neonatal circumcision. And more tellingly, it's a lack of respect for children and their rights. And I think that this is probably an outgrowth of this religious view, primarily a fundamentalist Christian view, that children are property and they're under the control of their parents, and you can do whatever you want with them.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm the let's be fair guy all day today, and not that there's anything wrong with what
I was
Jen
going to say, that's weird, me being more extreme than you.
Yes, as the guy who's normally the one who's going to get hate mail. The issue here, where you were talking about children as property, this is another thing that makes this such a problem. These are difficult questions. Parents have a responsibility to their kids. They also have rights with regard to their kids. They have rights with regard to how they educate them, how what kind of home life they have, within limits that basically, I'm an advocate that you have every right possible until we limit it. And parents have rights and responsibilities with regard to the kid. And there's a really difficult, I don't want to say gray area, but there's a really difficult area where the rights of the parent, the rights of the child, and the rights and the responsibility of the state kind of mesh. And it's difficult to necessarily decide. Now, normally, I think we should err on behalf of freedom until somebody demonstrates actual harm. In this case, I'm not going to be going down to the Capitol and lobbying that we ban, neonatal circumcision. I'm not so convinced about where the lines are drawn on rights issues, which is why we're actually discussing this and giving information. Because if we get the word out, get people encouraged and interested in getting information about the subject, it may change their mind, as it did for your partner. Mm-hmm. So, and I mentioned that we've got pros and cons. We'll probably touch on some of them depending on how much time we got, but we got full phone lines.
Yeah, let's
I want
take some calls.
Try and get to as many as possible. So I apologize if we go through this quickly, but all of a sudden the line's filled up. So Mike, how you doing? Good.
Nice topic you got here.
Did you squirm much during the topic?
Yeah, I did. As a matter of fact, you can tell by the deepness of my voice. So yes, I did that. I talked to your screen and you said it was okay if I went off topic a little.
Sure.
Off topic, but not really that much. Think about it. Glad I'm calling you late on the subject of abortion, and it's good I call in late so you don't get a lot of everybody's going to talk about abortion calls. But the thing is, I've had undergone a kind of a change of heart toward my attitude toward that. Right now, currently, I am let the women decide is now my new stance. I don't one way or the other. I think the women should fight over it's their body, let them vote on it, and then just men step aside. But that's where I stand now. Mm-hmm. Originally, I was kind of like pro-choice, blasé, abortion. Who cares? The soul will come back, and God will provide another place for the soul to enter the earth. And that's how I looked on it. Like man can't stop souls from entering the earth because God does it. That's back. But now in the dwindling gravity of my religious conviction has led me to think that, as you have stated as atheists, that we have this one shot on life, and there's no reincarnation, there's no afterlife, that every minute is precious. And they'd suddenly, ironically, if you see them get my drift, to lean toward abortion being not a really bad thing, that it really is depriving somebody of life. Do you see the irony of the...
we had problems with the audio, so I'm not sure I got to hear all your question. But basically, you were saying that your opinion on abortion has changed as your belief in God has dwindled.
Yes.
But that you've gone from a position where abortion was a non-issue for you to
as
one
a Christian,
where you may actually be opposed.
As I approach, I don't think I'll ever be a full-on atheist, but I think that I just think it's ironic that as a full-on Christian that I supported, I guess I could say, supported abortion, turned my back to it. And now as I become not an atheist really, but fully, I'm starting to have the questions I guess a lot of people do when they get older, like, yeah, really, religion. But then I'm thinking, this is the one life, as you have said, as atheists, that I'm less religious, and ironically, I'm against abortion, whereas the stereotype is that Christians hate abortion,
Sure.
and then that
non-believers
what you
to be
would think.
fair, there are, atheism doesn't prescribe, it doesn't have any dogma or tenets, and doesn't prescribe any position on abortion. And I know other atheists who are opposed to abortion or who are pro-life or whatever for various reasons. You're listening here in Austin, right, Mike?
Yes, I do.
Okay. There's another caller who's got a question almost identical to yours. So I'm going to go ahead and drop you, and we'll hit him and try and answer the question that way.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.
We've got, is it Ethan?
Yeah.
How you doing, Ethan? You had a question almost like the last callers?
Yeah, it's related. It's a little different, but I was going to actually see on the issue of rights, and if you're going to argue from the side of rights and talk about children as property, then what would I guess both your views be then on abortion? And if you are pro-choice, then how do you justify that as saying, arguing from the standpoint of it's wrong to from the rights standpoint because the baby has these rights that we can't perform the circumcision based on that, because I'm not calling to advocate or criticize circumcision as a practice in general, but and how you would justify that then with
it's a valid question. You want to start with it?
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference between a 10-week-old embryo and a live infant. Okay, not only developmentally, but in the way the law treats it, and in the way the parents treat the child. And I can speak from both, to something the previous caller said, and also address some of what you've said. Is that my partner and I faced a lot of these decisions because she was, I believe, 36 when our son was born, and so there was a lot of concern about, are we going to be dealing with some devastating chromosomal abnormality, and in some cases you can't find out about that until you're in the second trimester. And so, we actually had to confront a lot of these issues because, we very much wanted this child. And I can tell you that, from the moment you find out, whether you're having a boy or a girl, the question of what do you want a boy or a girl, doesn't matter anymore. It's I want this one. And so this child was very real to us the whole time, but we knew that there was a risk. And so we did all the genetic testing that we could, that we ethically could, because there are some risks to the pregnancy with some of these tests. So we went forward with a lot of assurance that he was perfectly normal, and it turns out that he was. But we had to be prepared to make a very devastating decision to terminate a pregnancy if it turned out that he had a chromosomal abnormality and had no hope of possibly even surviving his own birth. So I think that there is a lot of room for ethical decisions like that for parents, and I think that it's appropriate that parents have the freedom to make those decisions.
Yeah,
so from that perspective, I'm pro-life. Pro-choice. From the other perspective, I guess you would call me pro-life because, I don't want people terminating pregnancies because they don't feel like they have another choice, or because they got pregnant by accident or something like that. And so, in that sense, I would prefer that we have better sex education and we are able to prevent these pregnancies so that people don't have to confront those decisions, because I know how difficult they are.
To address kind of your rights question and to give my own view, because my view departs a little bit from Jen's, and there's a broad spectrum, as I mentioned before. Atheism, as it's not a religion, it's not a worldview, it's not a philosophy, it's simply a response to theism, means that you don't believe in a God, which doesn't say anything about what you do believe. So there we have, we have atheists who are pro-life, pro-choice, somewhere in between, depending on the issue. My view, number one, I don't have a womb, so and I don't want to use that as a cop-out, because I can still have an opinion on the issue. I think there's a room for some challenge on the gray zone of where the father's rights may or may not exist. But in general, my view is that the fetus isn't a person, doesn't have the rights of a person. I'm generally okay with the cutoff line that we've established for abortions, because I tend to view the kind of viability of a fetus to survive on its own outside of the mother, the arrival of the majority of brain function. I think that's a fairly reasonable cutoff point. I mean, it's hard to, where do you draw a line? I mean, you've got a blastocyst, which is a handful of cells, and then you've got a fetus that's 8 months and 3 weeks, which could easily survive on its own. There's, I mean, you can't distinguish that from a baby that's born, but you can distinguish it back here. My other concern is that we're talking about the rights of two individuals. We're talking about the rights of a parent, the pregnant woman, and the rights of the potential person or fetus. I'm not saying that an unborn child should have absolutely no rights, that it's non-existent, that it is something we can just completely ignore. These are real issues. But like I tend to kind of agree with anyway, I'd say the rights of the living person who already has rights, who is a productive member of society, whose health is a factor, I think their rights trump it. And while I'm not a fan of abortion, especially as Jen pointed out, as a means of kind of retroactive birth control, I have no problem at all with the way abortion laws are established now, and I'm pro-choice because I think the rights of that individual, the pregnant individual, are the ones that are of primary concern.
Okay. And one more question, and I'll let you guys move on, but without turning this, of course, into a strictly abortion conversation. But then on that note, would you then support, assuming technology, let's hypothetically say that technology advances to the point to where even, a embryo a week old could survive and be nurtured all the way until a full pregnancy in some artificial womb or something, assuming, that, like I said, the technology could advance to that point, would you then support abolishing abortion laws, because at that point then the rights become apparent, because
sure.
it's an individual.
I'm not saying
the
sure.
ambiguity to me seems like, because I guess I would say, where do you draw the line also, because it seems I guess the same way you said it, I would say it. So.
Well, I guess it's kind of a moot point, because if you're talking about transferring an embryo from a woman's womb to some artificial device that would then nurture
Bring in the gestation machine.
Yeah, then essentially you're still talking about abortion, because abortion is ending a pregnancy for that woman. So. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about just transferring an embryo to, a gestation machine or something, then I don't have an ethical problem with that.
I think a lot of people, maybe Middle America more than other places, and obviously Austin maybe not so much, but would define abortion as terminating the existence of the embryo, which is why some people, then consider certain forms of birth control abortion that others wouldn't. But
that's not a strictly accurate term for an abortion, because an abortion can take place on essentially a dead or dying embryo. Mm-hmm. So there it is possible, and then it's a medical term. It's terminating a pregnancy.
I think in the kind of hypothetical situation you've constructed, which is science fiction, but it's plausible science fiction. We may reach a point where we can already fertilize eggs and then implant them in a womb. So all we need to do is build basically the gestation machine, and we can grow from fertilization, from conception, all the way up to what we would consider to be a newborn baby, without it ever entering a womb. And of course that takes away the part of the argument or part of my position that I was making about the rights of the mother. And at that point, we'd have to make a decision about, okay, when in this span does this fetus, life form, whatever, qualify as a person with rights? And what rights? I mean, there are some people, I have a friend who says they're not a person until they can buy me a beer. I don't think we need to go that far. But you could make the argument, I mean, if we fertilize an egg, does it immediately, at that point, gain all the rights of a person? Mm-hmm. I think that's patently absurd. And this is a hugely difficult issue of where do we draw lines.
Yeah.
I'm mostly comfortable with where the lines are drawn now. It doesn't matter to me that we could maybe grow a baby from fertilization on. At some point, there's a noticeable change in the structure of the fetus to where brain activity occurs, organs are mostly formed to where they could plausibly survive on their own without the gestation machine. I think if we just replace the our current view of the motherhood of the womb and the rights of that, and apply that same thing to the gestation machine, we can draw a line in about the same spot. It's not easy, and honestly, I'm not advocating any position for anybody else. That's just where I kind of stand on it.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Ethan. Appreciate
Thank
the
you.
call. We got one more on, and then we'll not one more on. We have one more on the phone. William from New Zealand? Or, no, is that it? William, there?
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah, no, I want to mention the survey.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was at the meeting last week at El
Right.
Royals,
right.
Yeah.
and I mentioned the word circumcision, and Russell Glasser said, no. However, in New Zealand, the survey was Dr. Dina Dell, who happened to be Jewish and is against circumcision. He said that 9 out of 10 New Zealand women preferred the men to be intact. So if you're really interested in satisfying your wife, don't get circumcised.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, that's a good point. I appreciate the call, William. We're going to go ahead and let you go. We'll talk about that in just a second. And
Well, wait, I want to say one more thing. I was present when my younger brother was circumcised by my grandfather, who was a Moyle, and he screamed, and I was only 3 years old, so that's it. It's a
And you remember
torture to circumcise somebody. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot for calling, William. Appreciate it. Yeah, the survey that he's talking about, I mean, this is New Zealand women, 9 out of 10 prefer uncircumcised.
Yeah.
If you do the same poll in the United States, what you'll find is that I think it's 8 out of 10 prefer circumcised men. And that demonstrates an important aspect of this that we really didn't get to, which is kind of this cultural, social system we've built up where you have a norm that's expected, and people are immediately offended when you challenge what the norm is. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Christianity. People get offended when I talk about Christianity as if I'm talking about them. That's not the case. I'm talking about their religious belief. People get offended if you challenge any of their sacred cows. This idea, this kind of social construct, is that you can go ahead and address what we had on that.
Yeah. Basically, what you see is that in women who have experience with both circumcised and intact men, most of them prefer intact men. And what you find is if you do a survey of, for example, in the U.S., most women have little or no experience with intact men, and so they're going to express a preference for circumcised men. There's also a little bit of
The go with what you know thing.
Well, there's that, and there's this. Men are a little, concerned about whether women like them as they are, and so if a woman has a partner, there's often a lot of at least pressure in her mind to like whatever her partner has, because guys don't want their woman rejecting them, and in fact, on a lot of bulletin boards and stuff I've read, mothers who commented that they felt they had to have their sons circumcised, not because they wanted to, because they were pretty traumatized by the idea, but they felt like they had to because their husband was circumcised, and they didn't want their husband to think they were rejecting his penis. So there's a lot of this.
So it's not we want you to look like daddy, so you're not traumatized. We don't want to traumatize daddy.
Exactly.
I got it.
And this whole, well, I want my son to look like me, that you hear from a lot of guys, that really says a lot more about the man making that statement than it does about what his son may feel later on. Because the interesting thing is, I asked my brother about this, because my father was not cut. He was born at home, so they didn't do that at home.
They didn't have a sharp stone?
They didn't have a sharp stone.
What were they thinking?
Well, they didn't use it on his penis, that's for sure. But I asked my brother, I said, growing up, did you ever feel, strange being, different from dad? And he's like, I never even thought about it. So, this whole idea that fathers and sons stand around in the shower and compare penises, I think it's just absurd.
I'm not sure that I recall ever seeing my dad's penis.
Yeah.
Even when I was a kid. But I can tell you right now that if I do ever have a son, he won't be circumcised. It's not a decision that I'm comfortable making for somebody else. I see no medical justification to circumcise an infant, but if he grows up and he wants to circumcise, go for it. It's your tool. Yeah. I got a handful of. I wanted to make sure we got to this list so that we don't need to be fair and unbiased. We're obviously expressing an opinion here, and it's in opposition to routine neonatal circumcision. But I wanted to touch on some of the general arguments for circumcision and talk about them real quick and kind of give the response to it.
Okay.
The first one on the list is studies shown that boys have a 1 in 1,000 chance of urinary tract infection if they're circumcised versus 1 in 100 for uncircumcised.
Okay.
So basically, the argument here is that you have a lower chance of getting a urinary tract infection in your first year of life if you're circumcised.
Okay. The standard of care for an infection, whether it's male or female, is antibiotics, not amputation of the offending body part or something connected to it. And so there's that. Girls overall have about an 8 times higher risk of UTI than boys do, and we don't talk about cutting anything off of little girls to prevent that. Second thing is that's a 1% risk, and the absolute risk is much lower than that. But you compare that to about a 2% risk of complications from a circumcision, and circumcision starts to look not so good. Common complications for circumcision include hemorrhage and infection, and babies can and do die from those. So even though it's not common, it does happen, and 1 is too many. Let's see, there was another thing I wanted to bring up on that too. Oh, and all of this is if you don't count pain as a complication.
Right. And also, if you ignore the fact that this isn't really reversible.
Yes.
There is a movement, and you can go on the web and find out more information about it, about men who are trying to restore their foreskin. My understanding of this is that what you end up with is you're not getting your foreskin back. It's never coming back.
Right.
But you can return your penis to the appearance of what it originally was.
Yes.
But this is generally, outside of extremely complicated plastic surgery, it's non-reversible. And I'm not even sure that would you have to get a penis donor in order to really get the proper effect returned of having a foreskin? And can they even connect to those nerve endings? This is an irreversible thing. So the next one on the arguments for, which we actually already touched on, which was penile cancer prevention. But penile cancer affects only 1 in about 100,000 older men and is related to sexual behavior and has nothing at all to do with whether or not you're circumcised. We've covered the claims of lower risk of sexually transmitted diseases. The study, if I'd done this show 2 years ago, I'd have said there's no evidence at all that this is helping with anything. In 2006 and 2007, there was this huge study done. Huge probably isn't the best word. It's probably the largest study of its kind that studied circumcised and uncircumcised men in Kenya and Uganda whose partners, whose wives, because this was all about heterosexual sex, were HIV positive. And they provided them all with condoms, and then they did a study. And the results, which I don't want to overly chuck the study. There are problems with results, but it's still a decent study. It was significant enough to convince the World Health Organization and the United Nations Council on AIDS Prevention to encourage Kenya to look into male circumcision as a prophylactic measure against the spread of HIV. The study is far from perfect, and a better study would be, let's actually have people who are using condoms and using them properly in those situations, and then figure out whether or not there's a significant difference between circumcised and uncircumcised prevalence of transmission. Because the other thing that good medical studies show is that a condom is the single best preventative measure you're ever going to find. And once, for those of you who aren't familiar with penises or condoms, once you put the condom on your penis, it really doesn't matter too much anymore whether you were circumcised or not. You've dipped it in latex. You're covered. So I'd like to see a study that actually shows that despite proper condom use and cleaning, that uncircumcised men are significantly less likely, or significantly more likely. As a reminder, they put it up on the screen there because I haven't mentioned it. We're going to El Arroyo after the show. We're off here in like 2 minutes exactly. And we'll be down there around 5 o'clock till 7. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to join us. You don't have to be a member to attend. If you're coming down to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. You can email TV@atheist community for your discussions, or you can call in. We'll be back on again next week. I want to mention this ahead of time, as normal. You can call in then if you didn't get through, or you had problems with your phone. The gentleman who called earlier, if you had another point to make, you're free to call in next week as well. There are a number of good sites where you can go to get information about this subject. Mm-hmm. I don't know. We don't really have a quick and easy way of getting the links up. Did you have a closing remark that you want to make real quick? Because we've got a minute, and I've got a couple things to get to.
No, just that we've had this barbaric procedure perpetuated just because of ignorance and superstition. And the last thing I would say is that when it comes to circumcision, the more you know, the worse it is.
Yeah. But it is everybody's personal decision. Our primary goal is to get information out, to let you know that there's no medical justification for routine neonatal circumcision. Go do the information and the research for yourself. Don't take our word for it. Be a skeptic. Go find out. Thanks to our crew and everybody here. As a note, for those of you who were concerned about Florida's academic freedom bill, it is dead. We'll probably talk more about that and a lot of other things, including Ben Stein's comments that science leads to killing people. You complete moron. You are one of the most offensive people who has ever walked the planet. Thanks for tuning in to the Atheist Experience. We'll be back again next week. You can email, you can stop by the website, and don't forget to listen to the Nonprofits next week. We'll be live from 2 to 3. You can join in the chat room. We'll see you then. Thanks to Jennifer for